Well, Heaven Hill has released the final release here of the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch C925. It's got the highest proof, lowest age statement. What does that all mean for you? That we're going to talk about here on the My Bourbon Journey Whiskey Review channel. All right, everybody, welcome back. Thank you guys so much for joining me as always. So this is that release again every year, 3 times a year that we get super excited for coming off of each batch and the highly anticipated release of the next one as always. So here we are with the C925, which is going to be the last release of the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof here in 2025. So we're going to kind of dive into this thing, tackle it, as I had mentioned, in 2025, the highest proof, lowest age statement. So what does that all mean? So the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof C925 was coming in at 129 proof. Mash bill on this, very typical of the Elijah Craig Barrel Proofs, is 78 corn at 10% rye, 12% malted barley. We do know the age again on this one, 9 years, 1 month. So the lowest, and if I'm not mistaken, it may be the lowest age stated release they've produced so far since they've been going to the non-12-year age statement on this one. And again, a pretty friendly 75 bucks considering. And here's what I'll say. I'll preface all of what I just said before. To me, this is still an incredible value at $75. I think we nitpick the heck out of these things. You know, whether it's, you know, right or wrong, that's for, you to decide on that. But again, overall, I think at the end of the day, they're still incredible bourbons. And again, at 9 years, 1 month, that is still just the minimum age or the youngest whiskey within this blend. So again, there's probably going to be some older stuff in there. What that is, we don't exactly know. So without further ado, let's kind of dive into this thing and give you an idea of what the newest release here, the C925, has to offer. Here's what I'll also say, getting into the nose, what I did when I got this bottle was I allowed this thing to open up. I poured about half of the bottle out, let each of those open up independently, just to allow for this to get as much airtime as possible, give it as fair a shake as possible when doing a review. So I've only had this bottle now for probably a few days. I have tasted through it a little bit, but again, I wanted to introduce a little bit more air to this thing as quickly as I possibly could, again, to give it a little bit of a fair shake. So we're gonna see what that does, let this thing sit overnight. I've done everything I possibly can to try to get a true representation, or about as best of a representation as what it is you're gonna get with this thing, maybe even a little bit down the road. So let's kind of dive into this thing and see exactly what it's gonna give us. So right away, my kind of first thought was, when also sitting down with this thing the other day, was I was getting this heavy oak, maybe this slight Luxardo cherry, a lot of baking spice, more on the cinnamon side of things. This felt like a strong or a heavier, like cinnamon stick, something along those lines. But a lot of that vanilla custard also started to come out in this thing a little bit as well. I'll say nice brown sugars that kind of follow quickly into that spicy kind of category as well. Yeah, I do like the baking spice on this thing so far. Like, it feels so far like a very kind of tried and true Elijah Craig Barrel Proof profile. One that's not exploding, one that's not totally falling flat. We'll kind of dive into this thing a little bit more and see what it gives us. I think it does give you like a nice barrel influence. So to me, there still is that oak presence that's working, I think, pretty well with the vanilla custard, caramels, those again, tried and true types of things with a lot of what we're kind of accustomed to. But as I've kind of nosed it, more of the kind of nuttiness, that peanut kind of starts to trickle in a little bit more. Now, I don't know if that just has a little bit to do with the fact that there's some younger whiskeys in there, and some of their younger stuff has a tendency to have a little bit more of that peanutty kind of characteristic. So maybe that's why this is jumping out in comparison to like the B525. This has a little bit more of that, I think, classic Elijah Craig Barrel Proof kind of nose to it, or what Heaven Hill is kind of known for a little bit. Yeah, overall, I think just on the nose, it just feels like a nice bourbon so far. But, with that being said, really the proof is going to be in the pudding with this and how it's going to kind of translate over to the palate. So let's check out that right now. Cheers. So immediately, this thing is bringing all of that 190 proof right in your face. It's letting you know that this is kind of a proofier bourbon. A lot of that spice and heat that's kind of going hand in hand there. I know sometimes proof and spice can kind of trick people up a little bit with things, but this has both spice and the heat. What I'll say with this also is I do feel like you have to appreciate a bourbon that's a little bit more on that oakier side, a little bit kind of dry. There's maybe a little bit of a tannic note, some leather kind of notes, or some dryness that's there like immediately, all while still having a little bit of that vanilla kind of caramel feel to it. It's not quite as sweet as you'll almost get on the nose. It's a little bit more on that savory side of things with this one. So don't expect this one to necessarily be a lot of sweetness like on the palate for you right away. I think a little bit like I was getting early on the nose, there is a little bit of that cherry, Luxardo kind of cherry. It's always been a little bit of a richer cherry note, not like artificial or anything like that. So that's remained a little bit kind of tried and true. This feels closer to the A125 than it does the B525. The B for me was the outlier of the group, a little bit more well balanced. But going back to this, I think one of the things I'm also kind of focusing on a little earlier is kind of the mouth feel, the texture of it. It does feel where it's coming across a little thinner, not as mouth coating. It doesn't feel to me like the finish is ultra long. It's probably medium at best, and a little bit more of that kind of oak tannins are there. Again, a little bit of that vanilla caramel that's there. Not a lot of sweetness, I'll say, so far on this one. A little bit of cherry, like I mentioned, but you start getting into more of those leathers, tobaccos, the more drying types of things that you'd expect to get from something like that. So, you know, going forward, I think you just have to be aware that, if you're somebody who buys all of the Elijah Craig barrel proofs, that this one's going to be a little bit different than the B, but closer to the A. So depending on how you lean in each of those profiles, this one may kind of fall into that category of, maybe one you lean towards or maybe one you kind of lean away from. Yeah, definitely not as mouth coating, as creamy, as velvety as some of the others. Again, more of that cinnamon red hot. Maybe I shouldn't say cinnamon red hot. Maybe more of like a cinnamon stick, something along those lines. It's a little more one-dimensional. I said baking spices before, but for the most part, along with the heat, baking spices, a lot of that kind of more drier tannic oak that's there. You kind of mix in a little bit of that cinnamon stick feel, not getting a lot beyond that. This one, I think, maybe it's going to be something that changes as it kind of, the bottle is open a little bit more. I don't know how much more it can really change. I think at the end of the day, what you're going to get is, again, still a very good bourbon. With that, you just have to tamper your expectations. And this is, for me, one of the things that I appreciate about the Elijah Craig Barrel Proofs is that of the 3 releases a year, you kind of always seem to get something different. Again, whether it's something that works for you or doesn't, it's something different. It kind of keeps you on your toes a little bit with this one. So you have to just, I think, appreciate a bourbon that has a little bit more oak, quite a bit of spice, a little bit more of that oak tannin that's there. Some of the muted vanillas and caramels from a sweetness standpoint, kind of, again, that custardy type of feel. It's a little bit thinner than some of the others I remember having in the past. But again, at the end of the day, for 75 bucks, it's still always going to be, for me, in terms of recommendation, a buy. You know, again, this is where this becomes a little bit tricky because people want to compare each release with whatever their favorite was. And oftentimes that's a difficult proposition. So you have to just treat each one for what it is, appreciate each one, again, for what it is. And again, I think this falls into that category, again, of different. You know, we've seen the evolution. The A admittedly wasn't one that I was overly crazy about. B, I absolutely loved. C is probably, I guess, in my opinion, a little bit better than maybe the A batch. And again, I'll have to do these things blind in terms of figuring out what the best batch of 2025 is going to be. But at the end of the day, like I mentioned before, it's still a fantastic, fantastic bourbon, and one that probably everybody should pick up and try to enjoy for the most part. Again, in full transparency, these are bottles that are sent to us, or to me, by Heaven Hill to do a review of. I'm giving you whatever my honest opinion is of that, nosing and tasting. No grades, no none of that. If you want to buy it, great. If you don't, that's fine as well. I'm just giving you my interpretation of what I nose and what I taste and relaying that to you guys. So with that being said, let me know where you are with the Elijah Craig Barrel Proofs, what it is you look for, your expectations. Leave a comment below, you know, not only for me, but for anybody watching the video. That gives everybody a good idea of, maybe outside of, you know, my opinion, what others' opinions are as well. So again, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Greatly appreciate it. Here we are with the final release here of the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch C925 from Heaven Hill. So now we're on to the A126, hopefully to release in January sometime. So as always, looking forward to what the next one is from Heaven Hill. So again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to follow me, you can on Facebook and Instagram, those places at My Bourbon Journey. If you'd like to help support the channel and become part of the Mash and Journey Whiskey Club, make sure you check out the Patreon link in the description below. That down there with a lot of other great things for you as well. So with that being said, thank you guys. As always, appreciate all the love and support. And remember, it's about the journey and not the destination. Cheers. We'll see you in the next video.
I've been feeling myself, I've been trying to keep it all on track. Yeah. I can tell you took your time, I've been thumbing through your gram like that. Bring my energy back, girl, you're something like the sunlight. Girl, you're something like the sunshine.